Okay, go ahead.
Mm-hmm. So, like, I have zero experience with like managing teams or communities. Where now I do, but a month and a half ago I didn't, and I'm not entirely sure how to handle a process of like selecting players. What's the most fair way? How can you properly evaluate player skill, and not only skill but other important factors that would go into like being like a player and a teammate, so like communication, mindset, what should we like focus on, and stuff like this.
So, I think the first thing you got to decide is exactly where your team is aiming, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, is this like, okay, we want to be the best team in Europe, or we just want to be good, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Because they're two very different things,
Mm-hmm.
and that would ultimately decide what you're going to look for in the players, right?
Mm-hmm. So
So,
let's say we want to be the best team in Europe.
yeah, in which case, straight off the bat, the first thing you do, first phase of trials, right? You'd probably do open trials. Let's say you do open trials for argument's sake, rather than inviting people that are good.
Mm-hmm.
Those are the one of the two ways I guess you could do it. So we do open trials. You get a load of people to apply. First phase of trials, you would probably just look at their mechanics, right? And
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't even have to do anything particularly intensive. It would just be their mechanics are good, their mechanics are bad. These guys have good mechanics, these guys have bad mechanics. Um, and you would simply filter people on the start. Basically, this guy performed really well, this guy performed really badly. Um, that would be just your baseline, right?
Mm-hmm.
So as with most of these things, you just get a baseline of people that have the mechanical skill that you need, right? That for me would be the first step. Um,
All right.
so let's say so at this point we filtered out all the people we think are terrible, right?
Yep.
So we only have people now that we think are mechanically competent to the level that we need them to be. Um, at this point it can become very, very difficult. The second thing that I would look at would be communication. How well do they coordinate with their teammates? How interested are they in communicating with their teammates? Do they engage in discussion outside of the rounds, like in between rounds or in between games, talking about strategy or yo, so and so, can you do this other thing, whatever, right? Like how do they communicate in general? Um, do they have a leadership quality in their communication that again can be quite sought after?
Mm-hmm.
And do they maybe have the decision making to go up with that?
Do you
So
think a leadership quality can be kind of developed? Like for example, I guess like if you have a player that isn't necessarily good at being an IGL but has like a will to become one, is there some sort of process that we can like kind of help them to achieve that goal?
yes and no. I
Mm-hmm.
think that okay, so to be blunt, not really. You have
Mm-hmm.
to have an aptitude for it. I think people they have to have that level of self-confidence that they're happy to tell people to just shut the fuck up and do what I'm saying, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um but of course there is I mean, there's a balance to be held there, but someone has to be, I guess, have that they have to have it pre-existing, right? If someone comes in and they haven't said anything in a whole scrim, they're like, "Oh yeah, I'm really willing to try and be IGL." It's not
Mm-hmm.
going to work, right? It's simply not going to happen.
Yeah, fair enough.
Um, so yes and no, right? I think they have to have a certain aptitude for it, but they don't have to be there telling everyone what to do from the start.
Mm-hmm. So they have to be
Um,
outspoken, but you can, if they do have some sort of like a predisposed like maybe public speaking skills or some sort of, you can help them develop it more
they
by
can't
giving
be super
that
shy,
position. Yeah.
right? They can't be afraid to
Mm-hmm.
to put their opinion out in the first place. You just have
Mm-hmm.
to then at that point enable them to be able to do that.
Okay,
Um,
fair enough.
but yes, there is definitely a natural component of it that you have or don't have, and some people, probably the vast majority of people, simply don't have that.
Mm-hmm.
Um, okay, so We think that they're mechanically good enough. They're basically we think they're good enough players. We think that their communication is good enough, right? So we've then checked those two things off the list. So we've got people that are exceptional players, and they've got the communication that we need them to have, right? Or exceptional communication, depending on, like, if we're building the best team that we can, right? Exceptional communication. So what do we need beyond that, right? So knowledge is one thing. People that have a huge, like, okay, multiple things I guess we can look at here. Their history. Have they played in any other games? Did they achieve much in other games or not? You know, how much experience do they have, right? And this can go one of two ways. They can be incredibly inexperienced, and yet they've got this great communication and great mechanics. This is your, like, rising star, right? And the kind of guy that you ultimately probably would want to put. You'd be looking at this guy, right? He's young. He's 17, 16. He's great communication, really good mechanics. Like, this is the kid that is going to be really good, right? He's your long-term investment. He's someone you want to pick up.
Okay.
And then at this stage of the game, typically people with a shitload of experience that are maybe a bit older, right? So maybe someone that's in their late 20s that played tier 2 CS or whatever, right? Unless you're, you know, like, okay, we're building the best team in Europe, we're getting someone who's tier 1, right? But let's be realistic. You get someone with decent experience, who again shows the same qualities, right? But they're probably at the top of their curve, you know? They're as good as they're going to be, but they're consistent, right? That is the key to people with a lot of experience. If they've achieved a lot in their past, or achieved, I guess, a reasonable amount, I guess you can kind of set that bar as high or as low as you wish to. They would be the other kind of player I'd be looking at, right?
Fair enough. And how do you go about, I guess, finding these players? Would it be tournament standings, or is it just through your network of people? Like, how exactly do you do the scouting process of this?
So, like I said, initially you can just do open trials. So you would then have to attract people to you, which, again, okay, so a lot of this would come down to networks. You know, who do you know? What's your reach? How many people can you, like, really access? But, you know, Discord posts go a long way.
Yeah.
Especially if they're well written, and, you know, I guess you come across like you're some huge org, which isn't, you know, often is a massive lie, as a lot of these kind of people are making out.
So it's a lot of copywriting, just like making it sound
just make
like
it
you
look
mean
professional,
business.
you know? Yeah,
That's fair enough.
exactly.
Yeah.
And running things with the professionalism that you would expect of these players moving forwards.
Yeah.
So,
Absolutely,
you know, having a well-run trials process is a big deal. And knowing exactly how you're going to do that in the first place.
So another question, like maybe last question about the drafting process that I'm really interested about. For example, let's say you have this player. He has good experience. He has great mechanics, great knowledge. But for example, is lacking, maybe is like slightly toxic sometimes, or not even toxic, but maybe tilts a lot. Is there anything that you can yourself do to kind of help them work on their mental?
Yeah, so this would like pretty much go on to your next point about
Yeah, right. Actually,
how
it
would
is.
we do the structure, right? It's about focusing them in the right direction. A misdirection, right? Essentially, in that they're focused on how well are they doing, but that's not what they need to be focused on, right? They're frustrated because they're maybe making individual mistakes, but that's, again, they're missing the point. The point is that you need to be goal orientated, right? So you're going into your scrim session. You've got your team sorted, right? We've got a five man roster. Maybe we've got a sub or whatever. And we outline exactly what we want to get out of this session, right? The results are irrelevant, right? They winning or losing the scrim is completely beside the point. And this is something that players miss, right? They don't. It's very difficult for them to understand that point. Is that it doesn't matter whether you win or lose. It's whether you're improving at what you need to improve at, right? So let's say I don't know, communication is weak, right? And you need to have better communication about how you're discussing your setups, right? How are you setting up your crossfires or something like that, right? And they're not communicating that very well. And you say, guys, we need to communicate with this better, right? This is our goal for this session. You may have multiple goals like this, right? But that's just one example. And then they're going into that session and they've got that goal in mind, and they lose 0 to 13. But you know what? They absolutely nail it. And they're getting their comms down, and they're so much better than they were last time. And you know what? You come out of that and you're positive. And you have to, you have to help them learn to emulate that positivity. Give them positive feedback at the end of that session. It's like, guys, you did really well. This is exactly what we're hoping for. No one cares about the score. It's irrelevant. We've got to keep goal focused here. This is what's going to make us better, right? Because winning scrims doesn't make you better, right? Getting better makes you better.
Yeah, fair enough.
Right? So identifying those weaknesses and keeping them focused on them, not on the results of the scrims. The results of the scrims are a byproduct of your improvement.
Yep, absolutely fair enough. So, all right, how can I? So, when you look at a team or like specific players, do you give specific kind of tasks to each player, what they would work on in said scrim, or would be like more team oriented, or I guess it would be both?
It depends, I guess. So if you're running a one coach team, maybe you're not that focused. So this is something that like comes from Overwatch, I guess, or maybe it's something that people talk about in CS. But in Overwatch, we would typically break things down into macro and micro. Macro meaning like, as a team, how is it performing? What are the setups like? Is the team as a whole performing as you want it to, right? What in terms of like your executes, or what smokes are you doing? Where are your walls? How are you using your utility? That kind of stuff would go under macro, right? As a whole, right? You're looking at it from an overall perspective. And in which case you would be giving feedback on that particular aspect, right? Like, we need to be using our wall here. Our smokes need to be here to enable so-and-so to do this other thing, right? And you're not worried about the individuals, you're worried about as the team as a whole. And therefore you'd be giving feedback aimed at improving that particular aspect. But you may conversely be looking at micro, in which case you'd be looking at one player, right? Maybe looking at, say, his movement, his crosshair placement. How is he as an individual using his utility? How is his communication? These kind of things, right? And typically, like I said, so in Overwatch, we would break these down into two completely separate components, and a lot of the time you would have a coaches focused on macro and coaches focused on micro, and depending on how big your coaching staff was, you could have multiple on each particular role, right? Particularly in Overwatch, they could have multiple micro coaches, like, so multiple people that are looking at individuals, which again could work particularly well in Valorant, because people maybe aren't getting the maximum out of the agent that they're playing, right? So you're having one guy looking at how can our Sage player get the absolute maximum out of Sage, or how can our Brimstone player get the absolute maximum out of Brimstone, right?
Okay, fair enough. How many? So just about the amount of coaches per team. Like, could you share some more, like from your experience, how many coaches were there on teams, like from different levels, or because just some of your experience. Where do we go from here, etc.
So right now on my Valorant team, it is just me, which I don't think it's not ideal. It definitely isn't ideal, but I guess maybe right now finding other people that you like work well with, I don't know. It's not something that we've really explored because the team is kind of making progress as is. But in Overwatch, the contenders teams that I've worked on one team where I was the sole coach, the only coach on the team, which is hard work. If you're the only coach on the team, it's really hard work.
I can imagine,
especially when things are progressing really quickly, and that would be the same. It's the same in Valorant. If you like really want to get the maximum out of your team, you don't want one coach. You probably want at least two. Right now, and that's helpful in many different ways. Not just that you can spread the workload, but also that you can then have one person focusing on one particular aspect and another one focusing on another. So in Overwatch, like, the maximum I ever worked with was, did we ever have 4? We did have 4 coaches at one point in time on one team, which is a lot.
Yeah.
But it depends on, again, this is going to depend on like your coach's commitment. Like, how much time do they have? What other stuff do
Mm-hmm.
they have going on? You're not necessarily looked at like a player where, if your player's not playing 6 hours a day, at least, then he's not doing enough. As a
Yeah.
coach, once you've done your 4 hours of coaching and you're really having to think about a lot of stuff, maybe that's enough, plus an hour of whatever discussion that you end up having afterwards. As a staff, it's typical to be talking for an hour after a scrim, figuring out
Yeah.
exactly where your issues are, or what you really want to focus on moving forwards.
Mm-hmm. So
So
you mentioned. Oh, sorry.
sorry, no, you
Yeah,
carry
go
on,
on.
you carry on.
Yeah, you mentioned 4 hours of coaching. Just for me to get like a better idea of a time investment that we should like try to achieve maybe from our players, and like based on like what we are trying to achieve. So coming back to the practice structure, we have thought that, for example, each player would have his own responsibility of like learning, let's say, the molly setups, sova arrows in the time outside of the practice, and then have at least 4 to 6 hours of scrim time, or playing, like even matchmaking. How, like at a semi-pro level, what is the amount of hours that would be realistic to expect from a player? Like, I guess that would be my question. And how would you structure that like 6 hour window to like get the most out of it?
Okay, so this does depend on how many hours they have free in a day.
Hmm.
So, I mean, are you talking about people that are doing this full time, or are we talking about people that are working a job alongside this?
I guess let's do one and the other, because that would be both would be interesting.
So let's assume that they're working a job, right?
Hmm.
Which is
Hmm.
probably the absolute vast majority of people.
Hmm.
Um, 6 hours a day would be pretty reasonable.
Hmm.
Um, 4 hours of that would be team-based practice. Um, I guess I'm not really accounting for things that you tend not to account for. So typically, I wouldn't. I should, but I tend not to like actively take account of like the talk before scrims and the talk after scrims. So 2 hours of
Hmm.
matchmaking outside of all your scrim stuff, right? That would be pretty standard.
So that
Typically,
would be, sorry, 6 hours total, 4 hours of team practice, an
yes.
hour of talk, and 2 hours of matchmaking,
No,
right?
not quite.
Okay. What did I miss?
So
Sorry.
no, so it'd be typically 4 hours of practice. So that'd be two blocks of 2 hours,
Mm-hmm.
typically, right? So you'd block one out, you'd do 2 hours of scrims, which would be two maps, and then a break, and then another 2 hours of scrims.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and then I would expect another couple of hours or an hour of, but 1 to 2 hours of like practice on your own outside of that.
Mm-hmm.
And then typically prior to the scrim, you'd maybe have, say, a 15-minute chat. Guys, this is
Mm-hmm.
our goals. This is when we get out of this session. These guys are going to be difficult. These guys are going to be easy, whatever, right? Just a
Mm-hmm.
kind of preamble before the scrim, getting everyone in the right mindset and getting them more focused on what you want them to get out of that scrim block.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then maybe 30 to 40 minutes after the scrim. It really depends on the day. It could be 10 minutes. 10 minutes. Oh, guys, you did really good. Great. Essentially. Or 40 minutes. Okay, guys, our setup on split was shit. We really need to look at this really quickly. Okay, you need to do this other thing. You need to do this other thing. And look, you just fix a problem then and there rather than setting aside a whole
Mm-hmm.
hour of VOD review or whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
this 4 hours wouldn't necessarily always be set up like this, right? So
Mm-hmm.
a couple of times a week, you probably only do 2 hours of practice, and then maybe an hour and a half of review or setups or whatever, right?
Mm-hmm.
Theory, essentially.
Yeah.
Okay, so
Um.
if I may, you were talking about the player side, right? So what about the 4 hours from the coach side? How much do you put into VOD review? How much do you put into like doing the actual setups with the team? How much do you spend on like individual improvement? How do you usually manage to do that?
That depends again what coach
Yeah.
you are, like whether you're the macro coach or the micro coach. How are you going to split your time? Because if you're like, let's assume a multiple coaching structure, right? And you're the head coach, you have to be there at every single scrim, right? So already that's 4 hours.
Yeah.
There tends to actually, I mean, I guess 4 hours as a coach is kind of unreasonable to think about it like that. But I've only ever thought about it like that. I've never really tallied up the amount of extra time that I spend outside doing it because I want to do it. You know, I want to sit and watch the pro vods.
Yeah.
I want to watch our games back and say, oh look, this was shit, this was good. Let's do this thing differently. And figuring out, like, maybe you're not actively doing it, but you're doing your work in the day and you're thinking, fuck, that setup was so shit, why was that so bad, how do we fix that problem?
Yeah.
It's difficult
Okay.
to really tally up that time, and it depends how practiced you are, right? Like if you've done loads and loads of reviews, a lot of the time, like when you're watching it, you don't even necessarily have to prep, because when you're watching it live, you're writing in your notebook, this thing was shit, this is the talking point, great. And when we go over this, I'm going to talk about that. So those 4 hours, so you wouldn't necessarily have to do any prep outside of that. But maybe you're the head coach and you have to do a one-on-one with a player, at which point, you easily spend an hour prepping for going over one map with someone. It depends how much time you want to do it, right? I think you could be probably a lot more, if you're better at it. If you're better at it than me, then you would decide, okay, look, I want to focus on these specific talking points. Here, I've watched the VOD. There's a situation at this timestamp, a situation at this timestamp, and they both example exactly the point that I want to make.
Yeah.
That could go for either I'm working with a one-on-one or in fact overall, right? Like at the end of the game, in that 30 minutes post scrim, you could, for instance, then just go over, oh look guys, this timestamp, I want to talk about this particular round. This is what we should do differently.
Okay.
Or what are their opinions on it?
Yeah. Great. Thank you.
I realize that doesn't directly answer your question as to how much time there should be outside of scrims, but
Yeah, but I
have
got the
some
general idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Okay. What do we want to go on to next? Where
Oh
are
wait,
we?
I was muted.
Okay.
So you don't necessarily allocate time to, like, let's do like, okay, today we're watching like this pro match where they did like just I'm watching the whole game, discussing. You only, I guess, you do it very like granular. Whenever you want to show it, you show it into save time, or the other one is also viable if you want to do it.
It depends. Like I said, I would set aside 2 blocks per week, at least,
Mm-hmm.
that you're going to do review. They're going to do theory, right? And
Mm-hmm.
those could be, I want to watch let's watch this pro VOD together. Let's steal some of their strats,
Mm-hmm.
What do we think's good? What can we take from them? You could do that, yes.
What would be the other things you could do in that theory block other than VOD reviews and analytics?
Setups would be one thing. Drills as well. So, okay, guys, let's practice our A execute. I want to see you guys do it really well. And expect them to do it in a certain time frame or something, and make sure that they're all clearing whatever angles you expect them to. I don't know, however you want to break that down.
Okay, that's fair.
Discussing their setups, discussing their aggro plays. I don't know, like, we're going to make this push on A every round or whatever it is, right? You get them into a custom game and you get them to talk, well, not necessarily into a custom game. Typically, I'll do it with a map overview first and then say, okay, let's go actually do it. Because people lose focus a lot when they're actually in the game. Tends to be best in a theory block to completely avoid putting people into game, because you'll end up wasting a shitload of time. You'll just go off topic.
So you just go over the theory once you confirm that people understand and like they know exactly what you want them to do and what the goal of the session would be. Again, then you can do it, and then you try to just get as much attention out of them as possible and try to get that execute and try to get that drill done.
Yes.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah.
maybe you want to
So.
talk about like setups for a whole map, for instance. You know, there are lots of different. So setups for maps, like I said, the executes themselves. How are you going to do them? Actually practicing them, and as well watching over your VODs, right? Like, okay, guys, let's watch over Bind. We can just do this together. Or, okay, I want to showcase these particular points. I'll skip to the rounds that I want to talk about, depending on how much prep you've done. You've had time to do whatever, right? Like it depends how well planned you are, I guess, on the day, right? Because I understand, like, I understand the pressure that there is, and how many other things you got to be doing. You know, like particularly if you're working a job outside of this, you only have so much time in a day. But ideally, prepping for VOD reviews is good.
Yeah.
Sorry, no. Like even if it's just like when you're watching it live, is what I mean. Is what I was gonna say.
So I was actually wanted just a quick, maybe like off topic, but regarding a job, like, do you know a lot of like pro players that started their career while working a job, and then once they were able to go full time, they dipped it? Because in my mind, it was always just kids that were like playing 12 hours per day. Just that's the only way of breaking into the scene.
I don't think that's accurate. I think there's a lot of like kids that are at school, maybe, that have more time on their hands, I guess.
Fair enough.
But no, I think most people are working a job and trying to go pro.
Okay. Fair enough. Yeah. Should we go to the third point then?
Yeah, unless you wanted to talk about the third point in practice structure, which we haven't really talked about, but
Which one?
how to assess how good your training is, right?
Oh yeah, sure. Yeah. Let's do that. Yeah.
So typically, this is a really difficult one to answer, right? How do you quantify improvement? But if you want to tell how good something is, you have to be able to measure it, right? Is the answer. So there are multiple ways you can do this depending on your personal preference, right? If you're the kind of guy that wants to do stats, you do stats, right? You'll collect all your stats from every scrim. You'll see how they change. You'll see how your win rates change over time on particular maps or on particular sides. Or your first, like, how many times do you get first bloods per game, how many times do you win the pistol round, whatever particular thing you're trying to focus on. You look at those stats, right? Do they get better over time? If not, you're probably not getting better, right? Unless you're playing better teams, which again, this is like another variable that goes into it, which can make it difficult. But a lot of the time, that's why you'll kind of try to stick with a regular scrim partner. Certainly to start with, do a couple of scrims a week with the same team, and then you have a benchmark, I guess, to measure against.
About the scrim partners, actually. So I guess the quality of those matches is really important, because if your team has good fundamentals, and they really have to play a team with the similar skill level to actually, like, for both teams to be able
For it to be useful.
for it to be useful. So how would, I guess, you just play whatever teams you can until you find somebody that you like scrimming with, and then you just kind of stay in touch? Is there any
Pretty
other way of
much.
finding?
Yeah.
Okay. Fair enough.
That there are scrim discords out there that are worth getting into. I can send you the links after.
I guess it's Valorant Academy. Well, actually, just send them to me. Like, yeah, I would definitely love to get them.
Yeah. I'll send them after. Like, the top team challenge is probably the one to be in for scrims.
Yeah, don't have that one.
Okay, well that's the one to be in. Yeah, and the other way you can. So rather than just doing raw stats, like actual stats from the game, you could score these things yourself, right? Like, how was, say we have a player called Dave, right? How was Dave's communication today? How was Dave's mechanics today? How was Dave's decision making today? And if you score that every day for a week and take an average, you can again measure how where someone's at. But the goalposts can move, essentially, right? It's like, as the team gets better, you become more experienced, and you may be rating someone more harshly because you understand what they're doing better, and so you're like, well, God, this guy's an idiot. I didn't see this before, but now I understand how bad he is because I've been watching all of these other people playing the same agent as he is, and he's not doing anything that they're doing.
So
kind of
at
thing,
that
right?
point, in that situation, what do you consider doing? Just parting
Well,
ways?
hopefully you have to tell him that he's doing something fundamentally
Mhm.
wrong, and try and fix the problem. Like ideally, you've picked up a player with good communication and their mechanics are good, you
Mhm.
know, and they're coachable, which I think is something that we didn't really talk about very much in the
Mhm.
drafting process, but it kind of comes under the communication part, I guess. For me, part of it's, I guess, a vibe. I don't know. There's no real way of measuring how well you get on with someone, right? But if you
Mhm.
instantly clash with someone personality wise, what's the point? You know, it's not going to work.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
So,
trying to be
like,
with a girlfriend that you don't get on with.
sorry for jumping in, but like, what about people who are communicative, but like try to be IGLs? Everybody in the team right tries to be an IGL, and like you told that this player is an IGL, but somebody doesn't respect your decision, and like they're talking over each other, and like this falls apart under this falls under it, right? Like,
Yes, so you have
how
to
do you?
discipline them then, right? I mean, they're doing exactly what you told them not to do.
Yeah.
And you say
Okay.
to Dave or whoever it was that was doing what he was told not to do, Dave, you need to shut the fuck up. What are you doing, man? I've told you
Mhm.
16 times that we're listening to Brian, who's the IGL, right? We need to do that to move forwards, right? That kind of thing, you know? Put on your stern teacher voice and tell them that they need to do what you're talking about, right?
I feel bad for Dave. Fuck.
Yeah, dude, poor guy.
You see
Yeah,
what I'm
that's fair
saying, though,
enough.
right?
Yeah.
Like,
See.
they
For
have
sure.
to do, if they're not doing it, then they're not going to improve. It's as simple as that, right?
Yeah.
It's difficult to do this early on, right? You do have to build up a rapport. It's important to build relationships with players in a sense that, you know, you're friendly, but there still has to be a power dynamic there, right?
Mhm.
It's a balance to be struck, I guess, right?
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Should we move on? Are we
Yeah.
done with? I think.
Unless anyone
Yeah.
else wants to ask anything or mention
Yeah,
any points
Jared, do you
about
want to
that.
ask anything?
I'm too scared to ask anything.
Why? This is the Dave comment. Yeah, Jared is
No.
actually Dave.
Oh fuck, dude! Not Dave, dude. Okay, unlucky.
Then the mental health and physical health of players. How much of that is, I guess, our responsibility? Well, I guess not even that. Like, I want the players to be in good health because that not only it's good for them, but it's also it affects their performance. I guess what are the steps that we can take as like staff or people that play with them? How can we just help them maintain that balance
So this is
and without like crossing boundaries?
So this is an interesting question, actually, right? Because so I'll be totally honest with you. In the maybe what I don't know 1.5 years that I've been like I guess semi-pro, maybe. I never you never think about it like that, right? I've always thought, you know, I'm an amateur and I'm just learning. I'm just kind of like flopping around, hoping that it fits in, you know. But
Mm-hmm.
it's not something I've ever considered. I'll be honest. I want
Mm-hmm.
players to be fit. I would like if they did an hour of exercise every day. You can't force people to do anything, though, right? Unless it's like directly negatively impacting your brand, like, you know, they're a toxic shit in ranked and they're telling people that they're, I don't know, they're using language, they're racist or something, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you're a tier 1 org where everyone lives in a team house, there's very little you can do.
Yeah.
And you're not a counselor, right? When coming onto the mental health, you know, you're not a counselor, you're not an expert in that kind of thing. There's again, you can only really have a limited impact on that front, right? Like in the sense that I'm friends with you, you can talk about this stuff to me, you know, like you can offload this. But ultimately, that's not really your responsibility.
I agree to disagree to a certain extent because I feel like the mental health aspect, like tilting and self-loathing for making mistakes is part of the mental health, and I guess as a coach, that's kind of like that is part of your responsibility to try, but it's kind of, I guess that is achieved by just talking to them and trying to providing them like with another perspective on their
Yeah, exactly.
performance.
I mean, provide
Yeah.
them with the answer to the problem that they're having.
Yeah.
Ideally, or doing your best to find it, or just having a discussion with them, right? Like, and sometimes it is just they need someone to talk to, you know. Sometimes that is all it is, you know. Like, okay, shit, your girlfriend's being a dick and she's making your life really difficult outside of scrims, and that's affecting your performance here. You know, we're here to support you. We know you can get through this, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
You
Fair
know, you
enough.
can only be a supportive friend at the end of the day. You know, you're not a qualified counselor, like I said.
Yeah.
And there's only so much you can do to get people to do things like exercise and to eat well. They're all things that we love to do, and they're things that you should advocate for sure. You know, I mean, fuck me. It depends how committed you are. You could have a meal plan. Hey guys, look, let's follow this meal plan. Let's follow this exercise plan. Let's all do it together. Let's all get to the point where we can do 10 pull-ups, in a month. You know, let's all
Imagine.
make sure we're going for a mile run.
6 months to reach a mile in the gym.
Well, like whatever, right? Like, you know, oh, let's all make sure that we can deadlift 150 kilos. It really depends what you're at, right? Like, you could try, but it's not something that I've ever tried. You have so much other stuff to do, and maybe like as management, maybe that's where you can come in and be slightly more useful. I think that a manager that can really like do people stuff, you know, like people skills, is super important. But having said that, like you really want a manager. Like, we're talking about a general manager here, right? Like the head honcho. There's so much stuff you need to do, right? You really need to be networking. You really need to like have a strong brand, get social media stuff going. Like, that stuff is ultimately more important than one dude having it's not more important. It's absolutely not more important. But like, from a completely subjective point of view, it's more important than your players' mental health. Because you're an organization, right? Like, if you want to push yourself towards being a company, eventually, you know, if you want to build towards that ideal, then you have to run yourself like one, right? And therefore you have to be output focused. And social media is probably the most important thing there, right? Like, if you want to get sponsorships, a strong social media connection, big reach in that sense is ultimately what's going to get you there, right? If you've got 10,000 followers on Twitter, someone's going to potentially consider giving you a sponsorship. At least think about it, right? Certainly if you're getting results and maybe you're going for lands and stuff, but like the social media stuff's important. If you don't even have a social media account, it's never going to happen, right?
We have 6 followers. We started.
Which is obviously, yeah, but you know, baby steps. Everyone starts somewhere, man.
Yeah. Speaking of that, I guess content is key nowadays.
Yes.
So what would you, I guess, like, what would be some of the ways that we, like, as an like brand, as an organization, can start moving towards that direction? Should we encourage our players to stream? Should we kind of make like content together? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I know exactly what you mean. I mean, I'm a coach, so it's
Yeah.
not really my area of expertise. But we do, like, within my team, we have several content people that make cool graphics. Typically, like, people will do like frag movies, that kind of stuff. You know, that's pretty hot.
Yeah.
Yes, encouraging players to stream is great. There's that's one I'd be careful about, actually, because some people, they can stream all right, but can they stream? You know, there's a real difference between sitting there and playing the game and having people watch you, and like, hey guys, yeah, I'm Aplox, yeah, great, but you know, providing interesting content, engaging with your audience, and being a good streamer, right? And maybe you want people that are just there for that, right? You have Dave, who didn't make it on your team, but you know what? He's an absolutely fantastic educator. He really loves making content, and he just wants to stream, and he engages with his audience, and he's great. Have him as a streamer. Oh, he's a streamer for our org, right? That is something you can do in return for, you know, giving them free social media stuff or whatever, you know, that whatever you can provide them with, I guess.
what if that's whatever is nothing? I guess we just have to get somewhere.
Well, I mean, you could at least provide them with graphics, an overlay, all of that stuff, right? That is stuff you can do for free, right? If there's someone that's on board and part of your content team, then they should be able to provide that to them for free. And some people are just sucked in by that, you know, like an overlay worth, what is it? I don't know. You can probably get an overlay on Fiverr for probably a $5. So, you know, you're giving them $5 worth of free content, presumably.
Yeah. Fair enough. Okay, that's probably gonna be my next goal for a while. How do you deal with conflicts? I guess that's also part of like counseling, and I'm sure they happen. But what would be the like? Do you get two players in like a separate voice chat and you try to hash it out, or you just talk to them one on one? Like, I guess the severity of it. Like, when would
Depends,
you
yeah.
consider a player to cross the boundary, and you'd say like, okay, dude, this is too much. You're just gonna have to go.
So I think this is again part of like, what are you doing in your daily routine of your practice, right? You really must avoid this happening in the first place. The second it starts happening, you're really in the shit, basically, right? If people fall out, they fall. Sometimes people just don't get on at all, full stop, and then that's not going to work, right? And this is kind of, again, that kind of comes back to your drafting process. That actually, what trumps all above all of those things is synergy, right? If your team is going to work together or not, that trumps everything, right? Like, you'd have one guy that's slightly worse mechanically, but you know what? He just works with the team well. There's just something that clicks, and he works with them. And this all kind of comes in with this point, is that you need people that have the same kind of vision and the same values, I guess, right? People that will get on with each other. So, not to avoid the question, but essentially you try and avoid the situation from happening in the first place. And yes, there might be some minor conflicts, but you want to build, you want to build a family. You want to build a group of people that can say anything to the team. Like, you know what, Devi, fuck me, you played shit today. You played really crap. And he's like, yeah. And he's like, but I really think that like your communication was great. And maybe next time, like when you're playing, we could do this other thing. Or maybe they don't say it like that, right? Like, they would phrase it better. That's kind of the point, is that you get people that want to work with each other and want to be friends with each other. And you build an atmosphere where it's okay for people to criticize each other and give feedback. Like, I don't really like the way that you communicate in this situation. Like, I really need you to be much clearer, or I really need you to just not say anything when I'm doing this particular, like I'm clutching. Can you just shut up when I'm doing that? Because it makes my life really hard. That kind of stuff, right? Like, you build a family. Like I said, everyone can be open with each other.
Yeah, fair enough. Do you guys have any questions?
Yeah, sorry. Go on.
What? What's going on? Wait, what's going on? What did you
Zero's not
say?
listening.
I was listening, but I didn't hear what XP said.
Do you have any do you guys have any questions?
Can I build on what Aplox said?
Sure. Go ahead.
You guys know about like kind of the rainbow scene, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
Well, like as saying with conflicts, biggest team at the time, G2 they were like getting destroyed in the finals, and then during when they lost the map, they literally had to express all their feelings, literally like, what the fuck are you doing? Learn to aim, shit like that. And then I feel like at times like those, you just need to then express yourself to get that conflict out the way, so you know how like the level of understanding of each other.
Absolutely.
Because I've seen it even with like friends I've had. I know an A team where the IGL was having issues with another player, and then he had to literally go say to him like, we need to like solidify that one of us is calling out strats, and like me and another friend had to like chime in and say like, one of you is like obviously a better fragger, so you might as well stay on a fragging role.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Yeah.
So does that help?
I mean, you can't have the pent up anger, right? It will just it'll bottle up and bottle up and bottle up, and then be like, "Holy shit, Brian, you're shit," right? Like, God, you're so fucking stupid. Why the fuck did you do that thing? You know how it goes, right? It's explosive. And that's why you got to be venting all the time. Just little bit, because people can take a little bit, right? They can deal with a little bit.
What if they can't?
Then you don't want them on your team,
What if they
probably.
get tilted? But what if they're really good? But like, is there any like?
But can they improve? Can they take feedback? Because if they can't take feedback from their players, then how are they going to take
That's
feedback from a coach?
different though, because if we're talking about venting and feedback, I feel like that can be different sometimes. What if when somebody tells like, "Yo, Brian, you're shit," what if they get it into their head and they get tilted?
Well, if the person's saying, "Brian, you're shit," then that's not helpful, right? Like, that's not constructive. Brian, your aim is shit. Why don't you go play Kovacs for 2 hours a day every day? Like, okay, it's a tough one, but like ultimately it could be true. But again, you shouldn't like, it shouldn't be a mechanical issue, right? Like, you shouldn't be having players on your team that are likely to basically say to someone else, "Your mechanics are shit." You basically, all your players would need to be able to respect each other, and I think the first place, again, the synergy kind of comes back to that synergy aspect. Like, is your team going to work from day one? Do people fit together or not?
But it's okay if they don't, right? Especially because for us, it's kind of like a community thing, and we are kind of putting people together at the moment. And I'm not expecting the draft rosters that we're putting up right now to work, right? And it's like we'll just be moving people around till I guess something clicks.
Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely how you do it, right? You put a team together, and if after a couple of weeks you're like, "Fuck, no, Brian and Dave can't be on the same team. It just doesn't work." Then I'd kick one of them, or I don't know, if you're a community, you just move them to another team, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. Oh, we've touched on Kovacs actually. So I want to like really encourage players to use that, but I don't have like as much knowledge on I guess the raw mechanics of aiming and what to suggest people to do. Is there maybe like a complex of exercises that you would recommend for players, or how would we go about like recommending specific routines or exercises to them?
It's not something I've ever had an issue with, I'll be honest.
Oh, so people just
most people at the level that like, I don't know. It's something that I guess. So a lot of the time, it depends. Okay, so sorry. My thoughts are all coming out at the same time.
all good, all good.
So I coach people on a whole spectrum of levels, right? But typically people are at one end or the other. They're either like exceptional, and then it's not a problem because they know what to do, right? And ideally that's what you want on your team. Or they're really crap at something, and it's really obvious what the problem is. But there's a variety of solutions to a variety of different problems, right? And it depends exactly what the issue is. Is there spray control trash? Is there crosshair placement trash? Is there peeking trash, which would be a movement problem? Maybe it's not a movement problem. Maybe they just don't know the maps very well. It really depends what the problem is, right? As to what you would suggest, because some people are really good at some things and not so good at others. But like, all of the stuff provided within Kovacs is good. It is still aim. It gets your mouse moving. You sense the sensitivity the same. It is going to build your muscle memory, irrespective of whether it's like good or bad. But I believe there are specific. I've never actually been into Kovacs. I've only seen people use it, so I don't even know what exercises are offered in there.
Oh, fair enough.
So I can't really provide much more insight onto that.
Fair enough. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll figure something out.
It's okay.
Like I get for me the main goal is to just get them to do something at least.
Yeah.
And then once they I guess, especially like for me when I started using Kovacs, it was a pain for like a week and a half that I was really bored doing it. But once I started hitting shots, I was like, okay, never mind, this is fucking great. Let's do 2 hours per day. This is great. I want to keep hitting shots, and yeah, it keeps going. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, but I mean, ultimately, like for me, nothing beats playing the real game. Like at the end of the day, nothing is going to prepare you for playing the game better than playing the game. It's as simple as that. Like drills are great, and things like Kovacs are great tools, but they they aren't as good as playing the game. Simple as that.
Yeah.
They're high intensity, maybe, but they still aren't as good as playing the game. It's not the real life situation, right?
I feel like they just kind of zone in on like specific aspects that you wouldn't be able to practice as much.
Exactly.
Yeah. I actually don't have any more questions at the moment. What about you guys?
Have we finished all the questions?
I think we did.
Yeah, I think we've covered everything that's on the draft thing that you sent me.
Okay. A question I wanted to ask is how does it feel transitioning from Overwatch to Valorant?
Great. Overwatch was a shithole. Jokes aside, I guess there's steps up and steps down, because like being part of, I guess, what was for like a kind of bigger organization with a bit more kind of structure to it, I guess was nice. But I guess strictly speaking, I could have stayed with that org actually and moved to Valorant, or potentially maybe I would have had the option to do that if I'd pushed for it. It's just a different game, you know. I think having it's similarities, differences. Like I said, like the scene isn't nearly as fleshed out with Overwatch. I could like pretty much no matter the level of the team, I would have a very clear idea of exactly what I wanted. Right, it would be, I want this to be done like this. This is how it should be done. This is the right way. And that could vary from coach to coach, sure, right? But like you have your own coaching philosophy, I guess, and your own ideas about things. Whereas I guess in Valorant, it's for me less like that. In that a lot of the time it's, well, what do you guys think? Like I would do something like this. Maybe we want to do something of this nature, but you know, I've only
Do you
known
think
this
it's
game
because
as
it's
long
so
as you
young?
guys have. So yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. You know, the knowledge isn't out there. There isn't a this is the way that things are done, right?
But I feel like it's so exciting because of it.
Yeah,
Because
yeah. I mean,
everyone
that's
is
what makes it
trying like
interesting for
dumb shit
sure.
and yeah.
Absolutely. But I
Round
think that's
6.
like the biggest difference is that like in Overwatch, there's kind of a set way of doing things. There is a given understanding because it's so fleshed out, right?
And it's been around
Whereas
for a while now.
exactly, yes.
Luckily, Valorant isn't goats, so we don't have to do anything like that.
Yeah. It's very different actually though. I think Overwatch was a lot of teaching people stuff. How does this work? You know, like there was so much more depth to it. Whereas Valorant, it's like, okay, let's do steps 1 through 10, and we've done the thing right. It's way more like scripted, I guess. Whereas Overwatch was much more dynamic in the way that it was played. But like we're talking about differences between games at this point.
Yeah, that's fair enough. But I'm guessing since you made the switch, you believe in Valorant and that it's gonna be huge, like all we do.
Yeah. I mean, you know, no one can stamp out a scene like Blizzard can. You know, they've done an exceptionally good job of like really making things impossible for anyone. Like really trashing on anyone that wants to be professional, making sure there's no money at all. They've done a really exceptional job of that. So I don't believe that Riot can do nearly as good a job of like stripping all of the money out of it, bleeding everyone dry, and then making one of the biggest flops in esports history. You know, like tens of millions of dollars lost. I don't think anyone could do that as well as Blizzard can. So, yeah.
Okay, that's fair. Fair enough.
Riot will not do that. Basically, you know, you've seen League. Simple as that.
They have
Riot's
some
too big of a
experience.
company.
What do you think? How is the meta shifts gonna affect Valorant? Like because with League, I don't know how it is with Valorant, but with League especially, the patches that would come out and just completely shift the meta, would put like players in such enormous like stress. I don't know how is that in Overwatch actually.
Don't even talk about it, dude. I can't even.
I'll-
Every week they would ban heroes, so you had a new meta every week, and you then had to recoach your players every single week on a brand new meta, and you know you're playing for $10,000 each week, right? So yeah, enormously stressful. Probably the absolute worst thing. The second you step out of the Overwatch sphere, you realize how absurd it is. completely nonsensical because they can't balance the game.
What do you
Everyone-
think?
oh,
Yeah, sorry.
no, it's fine. Go on.
But like, I can also kind of see like why they would do that, like both in League and Overwatch, to kind of to keep generating kind of content,
It
right? So
spices things
would
up,
be-
sure,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
But people look at CS, right? Probably
Mhm.
again one of the most successful esports games. How
Mhm.
often do they change how the character moves, or like, oh,
I have
let's
no
give him a
idea,
new
actually.
ability? They just don't. They don't. Is the answer. They patch stuff
Yeah.
that's broken, like, oh, this smoke was dumb. Let's get rid of that. Oh, we don't want to make this boost possible, so we'll put something in the way. Map changes more than anything else.
Revolver flashbacks.
People don't
Oh.
want to watch stuff that's new. They want to watch stuff that's perfect. That's what they want, right? And that's what CS offers, is perfection, right? The same thing done so many times, hundreds if not thousands of times. They've got so good at it that it is, they are that much better than the average person doing it. It is exceptional to watch. Right? And that is the real thrill of it, is watching them be so fucking good.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I hope that Valorant goes that same direction. Not we're just gonna try and move stuff around, shift the goalposts all the
Yeah.
time. But
I feel like it's going to be like in the middle with
yes, hopefully,
maybe
hopefully
like
it
new
is.
agents, new maps. I think they're going to be somewhere in between.
Yeah,
The best
sure.
of both worlds, hopefully.
Let's hope. Let's hope.
Pray to Jesus right now.
Do you
Well,
have
fair
any other
enough.
questions?
So another thing I wanted to ask you said you're coaching a Valorant team, right? So what ranks are the players in your team, and like, I just want to know about the team,
So I think everyone's Immortal 3, bar one guy who's not had a great run at ranked recently.
Mhm.
And they aren't in Valorant because Valorant's top 100 in EU, and unfortunately you can't get Valorant until someone deranks from it. So it's a difficult one, unfortunately.
Mhm.
So they would be all Radiant. Sorry, I imagine they would be fighting people out of Radiant, but you just can't because people can camp the rank essentially.
Oh, and like, so the only way they derank is if they go inactive for 2 weeks.
Yes, basically.
What
So
the
if
fuck?
someone's
That's
no,
genius.
they can lose it by going down. But the thing is,
Oh,
there's only
okay.
a limited number of Radiant players. They can only be. It's the top 100, I believe, or
Mhm,
top
mhm.
150.
I think they confirmed that every region has 50 to 150 players.
Based on the
So
size of the region, right?
yeah, so 150 top
Also.
150 players in Europe,
And
right?
that's
So
probably going to be like NA in Europe.
So there can be Immortal 3 players who are better than Radiant, but they just won't get into the rank.
exactly, yeah. So I
Well,
believe that all
the
the
rank
players in
system
the
is
team
kind
are
of like
Immortal 3.
Well,
Yeah.
no one owns the rank system, so.
Yeah, I know,
They-
that was funny. All that that stuff. Anything else that's like on topic?
I don't think so.
Okay, cool.